Hello, welcome to the Feelthepsychology podcast. I'm Dr. Ashleigh, and today I'm joined by my good friend Pamela, who is a psychology lecturer in Glasgow, Scotland. So in today's episode, we'll be talking about dyslexia, and we're going to try and debunk some of the myths that surround dyslexia. So Pamela, can you maybe start us off by just telling us a little bit about your understanding of dyslexia?
Hi Ashleigh, thank you so much. So I suppose, everyone's expectations of what dyslexia is very much based on a literacy issue, a literacy concern. And, you have problems with your reading or your spelling. And that is not just what dyslexia is. Dyslexia is so much more than just a reading issue or a spelling issue. And there are many, many factors to consider when you take into account dyslexia overall. So there's, yes, you have spatial awareness concerns, there's memory difficulties, motor control, reading and spelling are part and parcel of the problem as well. And I say problem, it is a problem for dyslexics. It's not just the one category of dyslexia that you discuss, or the one aspect, or the one ailment, whatever word you want to use. It's still a negative aspect of dyslexia. And that comes from a very personal perspective. With dyslexia, it's about the listening and the comprehension and the processing, as well as the writing for some. But that is not all encompassing, and it's not that every aspect of these challenges will affect every single dyslexic person. But equally, not every dyslexic person struggles with one or two aspects. And it's very important that you acknowledge that there is more to dyslexia than just spelling and reading concerns. So there's very much the right and left-handed confusion. You certainly get lost easily. There are sequencing concerns in terms of the numbers, and yes, learning your alphabet and learning it backwards is certainly a challenge as well. Times tables, goodness gracious me, don't even get me started on times tables and trying to remember dates. Coordination concerns and difficulties, handwriting. Some are very much really struggle with their handwriting, but equally, some dyslexics can be really neat handwriters, and that can be a very positive aspect of their dyslexia. Difficulties copying, very much copying down from the blackboard or the whiteboard, or just anything that you have to repeat or copy down. You will certainly take that down incorrectly because you're trying to process the information, and that takes a lot from a dyslexic brain to try and reintroduce that information, and then for you to have that as an output. We're certainly getting lost when you're reading, in terms of your reading aspect. If you're reading a sentence within a book that's small text, and then you're trying to find, if you get distracted and you're looking for a paragraph and you're looking for that word within that paragraph, it's incredibly frustrating. And then there's the overlapping of the words move around in texts. And also not knowing what the word is that you're looking for as well. How do you spell that? If you don't know how to spell it, you can't find it within the text. Hearing sounds, a lot of dyslexics really struggle with hearing the sound, and that is in terms of trying to learn your phonics at a very early age, you can really struggle with that. So if you can't learn at an early age, you're going to struggle later on in life as well, in terms of moving into adolescence and adulthood. Similar sounds cause a lot of confusion. So if a word sounds similar, then you're going to maybe navigate to another word which has a completely different meaning overall, and it can be really embarrassing if you use the a word, and people haven't picked up that it's a neurodivergent concern that's came through. And they often do, laugh and joke about it. And it's humiliating when you use the wrong word, especially when you realise it has a polar opposite meaning at the depth of that. I suppose taking down notes, if you're in a classroom or a lecture hall, that's a real concern, that you're not being able to capture all the information that's being given. So you would usually miss the majority of the information that is being spoken to you, and you'll only catch a small snippet. So overall, you've missed the whole context of what's actually being said to you. Organisational problems. Dyslexic people do struggle with organisation, time management, just being able to really process everything and getting all your ideas out as well. There is a lot that dyslexic people struggle with on a day-to-day basis, but dyslexic people are incredibly gifted in so many aspects. And whilst there's all these challenges that dyslexic people have to overcome on a daily basis, they are phenomenal at problem solving. Most are incredibly creative, massive big picture thinkers. They often see outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredibly observant. Because they have that natural ability to think outside the box, they can see outside the box. Incredibly high levels of empathy are more common traits. Narrative reasoning, very good at producing a reflective piece, are reflecting well within their own personal circumstances. Three-dimensional thinkers, like I was just, touching on in terms of how they're, it's a different process of thinking. And most dyslexics are above average IQ as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. There's definitely a lot to think about there, because I think it's like we can be very guilty of, I suppose, when we do hear of different neurodivergent, things like dyslexia, like we do tend to focus on the struggles and the difficulties that they find, and obviously that's not to take away from the difficulties and the experiences that these individuals have. But I suppose it's also recognising the fact that it's one of those ones where there are many positives, and that there will be skills, and maybe perhaps because you have struggled in one particular area, then you maybe compensate, or you have additional skills that you've developed in other areas.
Absolutely, Ashleigh. I suppose for dyslexia as a condition overall, we were very much a society, and still are, of undiagnosed dyslexics, and the challenges that are faced. And the more common age bracket for being diagnosed or for symptoms to appear really do appear, kind of about the age 5 to 7, so your early primary school years. It can be picked up earlier, certainly at home, but I suppose for a formal diagnosis, you're talking about the 7-year-old mark, especially here within Scotland. Any younger is certainly not considered, just because of age of development and age of learning and processing. It's important that we don't get a misdiagnosis or an incorrect diagnosis. But for dyslexic people, then there are so many support tools that are available. It's just about finding the right tools and the right support for that person. For example, coloured overlays or larger font. Putting it into a font that's actually easy to read. Yeah. And that's really important. So any joined up fonts then are just really confusing and can be quite sore on the eyes. And being dyslexic, you do get tired a lot more with your reading, and it is an absolute chore to read a text. So making it easier for people to see, allowing extra time for reading as well is important. For those that are struggling with their handwriting, maybe a scribe would be helpful. There's lots of also readily available software support systems and applications that can be put onto laptops and devices, and also using a dictaphone to record conversations, meetings, lectures. There's also sorry, just to come in there, there's also another one that I'm finding is quite helpful for lots of people, is this kind of voice to text software that you get, and believe it or not, it does work for a Scottish accent also. So it's interesting you say that, because I was actually late diagnosed dyslexic, and I was starting my university education at that point in time, and the voice to text recording software at that point in time was incredibly infuriating.
Right, I see.
Because it was an American accent, and there wasn't Heather, which I think is the Scottish accent, the Scottish female that I think is used. And it's very different now to what it was. And I suppose it's about understanding the evolutionary process in terms of dyslexia and the the diagnosis process now, I suppose when you're going back to when I was at primary school, it was missed, and it was very, very, to me now, looking back in hindsight and reflection, it was blatantly obvious that I had problems with reading and spelling, and my clumsiness and my processing, everything was there, and my time management was awful. Even although I was still young, I knew that there was something just not quite right, but I couldn't tell you what it was. And as I got into high school, I remember, I think I was 4th year, and having to read a paragraph out in English class, and the torment that caused of having to prepare to stand up and speak in that moment with no preparation allowed, and you're doing not very much in the class at that moment in time, that still taunts me today.
Yeah. And I was just thinking as well, like, so 4th year, we're thinking about the Scottish education system.
Of
so
course.
in terms of age, you would have been around about that age. You would have been
15, 16.
So very much, self-conscious. You're at that stage where I suppose you're not wanting to make a negative impression in front of your peers, and And I get that. I have been the same as well. And it's like, when it was, each person had like a different bit that they had to read through. And then you would work out how many people around the table you were. And like you try and work out what number you're going to be, whatever line of the text that you're going to be, and almost like rehearsing it. And,
Absolutely.
And just hoping that you don't have any difficult words.
Well, that's exactly what I had to do. And I had to work out what number I fell within that page, essentially, so that I could read ahead. But as I was doing that, of course I wasn't hearing or processing where anybody else was. So I missed my cue. So then I'm panicking as to where to find my part within the page, because I've looked up and realised that all eyes are on me. And now I'm trying to frantically find my space within that page to read that text out. But I never had any problems with writing.
Okay.
So my writings, I like to think, is quite neat.
Okay.
But my reading, my processing, my spatial awareness, time management, all of the other things that necessarily aren't associated with dyslexia are a challenge on a day-to-day. And I think that it's important that these are also, they are discussed and they are considered, because they're not the easy go-to ones that people recognise. No, they're not what
you think of when you think of dyslexia.
And I think that's important, that if I had been diagnosed early,
you could have maybe explored that a bit further. Is that what you're wondering?
I could have had that support network in place, and I would have been able to have had better grades at school, because obviously that has certainly had an impact in terms of my earlier education system, and certainly how I felt about attending school and what support that was giving at that time. But knowing now that I am intelligent and I am above average IQ and I have so much more to give in terms of being dyslexic, as we'll talk about labelling theory and implications, but for me, having that diagnosis was revolutionary, because it was certainly the driving force in going back to education and obtaining my undergrad, and then obviously my postgrad, and now pending PhD. So it was the driving force to a much greater quality of education life, I suppose, in that sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really gives you a lot to think about, and I suppose it's thinking about, it's how you perceive that. And I think it is. Every individual will be different, but it's like, I suppose it's like how you interpret that and move forward with that, and make that and do the things that you have to do in your life to help you move forward, and like understand like the necessary like accommodations and things like that you need to put in place. I suppose I was just wondering, in terms of like, we talk a lot about, I think some people find this quite interesting. It's that idea of like well-known people that we know might have a diagnosis of like dyslexia and things like that.
There's so many dyslexic famous people in the world that it's actually just really difficult to give a few names. However, I will give you a few names, and they are surprising when you look at them and you see the names and you think how successful they actually are. So Sir Jackie Stewart, famous famous race driver within Scotland, Stephen Naismith, football player, Jamie Oliver, world-class chef and author. And speaking of authors, this is an author that we will all know, no matter what country we're in, is J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. And she is massively famous within global perspective. But struggled with dyslexia. And I think it's important that no matter if you have a dyslexia diagnosis or not, that it shouldn't prevent you from achieving your goals.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just phenomenal in itself. Like, the author of Harry Potter has dyslexia. And, that's absolutely incredible, because I think it's just like, when you think of like one of like the most well-known books in the world, like across like every country, no matter where you are, there's always like so many like Harry Potter fans and things like that. So that's incredible to actually think that the author has dyslexia herself, and she's been able to write one of the most successful children's books of I'm not sure all time. Can I say that?
I would argue all time
I would
as well.
say,
it's a classic series that then has turned into a multi-billion industry because of her love and passion for literacy and how to just tell that story. And she's obviously been able to use the tools and support networks at her disposal as well, and certainly tools that we have discussed already within this session that would have been able to aid her in being able to achieve her goals. So there are many positives from being dyslexic, and I think it's fundamental that they're the ones that are paramount and they're the ones that stay at the forefront rather than focusing on the negatives. Whilst being dyslexic can have challenges, and you certainly focus on them aspects throughout the day, and it is a daily challenge having to overcome being dyslexic, and for many reasons across the spectrum of the all-encompassing dyslexia concerns or challenges or hurdles, however you want to term that. But with these strategies put in place, then you can certainly aim for the stars.
Absolutely. And I think that we'll leave it right there, because I feel like that's such a positive note to end this podcast on. That was fantastic, and I think it's really inspiring, really, just to, like you were saying, there are no, but like, it's one of those ones where you might have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but that doesn't mean that you can't achieve your dreams and your goals and whatever's important to you. And we might have to put some strategies, some accommodations in place to help you achieve that, but it certainly shouldn't be a barrier to you. So thank you so much, Pamela, for taking the time to share your story. I feel like that would really benefit so many people to hear that personal lived experience that you've been through, and how you dealt with that and how you moved forward with that. So thank you so much for taking the time. And also, I'd just like to remind people that if this is something that you are concerned about for yourself or for perhaps a loved one, then we would advise you to seek professional support and guidance in exploring this further. But we'd just like to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. Thank you.